Well, I'll get this date right. I want to take you back to the year 1999. I was in fifth grade, and it was Christmas time. And like any young kid in elementary school, what do you think I wanted for Christmas as a fifth grade boy? Any guesses? Very close. It was the better version of Nintendo, the Sony PlayStation. Very close, very close. So I wasn't involved in the decision. My older brother actually, he was the one who scouted this out. But between that Sony PlayStation, my best friend down the street, well, he did have a Nintendo and a Nintendo 64. So between the two of us, we had the best that the late 90s had to offer when it came to gaming technology. I remember very fondly those days, playing Mario Kart, playing GoldenEye, Final Fantasy VII. My best friend Owen and I had a blast doing that. And I want to make that very clear. We had a blast. Video games can be very fun. They can be very enjoyable for our kids, even us as adults. And everything that we do when it comes to technology, there's a lot of entertaining things that we can do on our phones when it comes to YouTube or TikTok or Instagram or social media. But the point of today's time is, hey, let's make sure we're building self-control around that. Let's make sure we're understanding how it's impacting us. And for me, how it was impacting me is I continued to play games and I continued to go on into middle school and into high school. And if you would have asked me, hey, Ian, what's your dream job? What do you want to be when you grow up? I would have said, if I was in today's generation, I would have said I want to be a professional esports player. Like I want to play video games professionally. Thank the Lord that was not an option back then because I probably would have tried and failed. But I wanted to make video games. And specifically, I wanted to work for a gaming company called Blizzard Entertainment. Does anybody know a Blizzard? No? One? Okay. That gives me a sense of our video game general knowledge. So Blizzard is merged with Activision. It's the largest video game company in the world. So they create games like Candy Crush. Anybody heard of Candy Crush? Okay, there we go. They create games like Candy Crush. Create games like Call of Duty. They create some of the largest video games in the world, and they were just acquired by Microsoft for $72 billion. So huge company. I always wanted to work there, and I checked their job boards hundreds of times. They're just down in Irvine, so they're not far. It was local. I grew up in this area. This was a very real, achievable dream for me. But they also made some other games, and one of the games they specifically made was called World of Warcraft. Now, World of Warcraft is a very immersive game. You create a character, you get loot and armor and things for your character, and you level up your character. And I started playing this game when I went off to college. So gaming through middle school and high school wasn't a huge problem for me. I got good grades. I didn't think it was distracting me from what I thought I was supposed to be doing, right? Do well in school, get into college. I went to Long Beach State, and I was able to live on campus all 4 years at Long Beach State. Living on campus gave me complete freedom, right? So at the age of 18, now I'm in the driver's seat of how I want to spend my time. And so I realized, why don't I put all my classes 2 days a week so that the rest of the days of the week, I don't have to be distracted by school or interrupted, because sometimes, I might have forgotten to go to class if I was playing games, right? I might have been a little late. The round might have not ended, and then I was running or riding my skateboard to class and rolling in late. So I was starting to have some problems. So I was like, let's not make that happen. 5 classes, Tuesdays, Thursdays, let's just knock this out. But what that meant was I was starting to play World of Warcraft more and more and more. And so on a lot of those days when I wasn't in class, 4 to 5 days a week, you probably find me playing World of Warcraft for 12 to 14 hours a day. Pretty much just taking breaks to use the restroom, to go get some food. And I started kind of worrying about this pattern or this behavior. My friends, my sister, I remember her talking to me like, "You're playing that game a lot." And my friends were inviting me out to go hang out on a Friday, and I was like, "Well, I gotta kill this dragon." I didn't admit that was what I was doing, but I just made some excuse. I said, "This is probably not good. This is probably a bad habit, something I should do something about." But I didn't do anything about it for a while. And I don't want to brag, but I was kind of a big deal in the World of Warcraft. I know that means nothing in the real world to all of you. And my wife in the back there, she met me post World of Warcraft. So probably good that it was post my World of Warcraft days, because I wasn't a big deal to her if I was in the World of Warcraft. But what that meant was, in the World of Warcraft, you have these guilds, these groups that you play with, these groups of people from all over the world that you play with. And I was in the top guild in my server in the game, and I was pretty much the top of my class. I had all the best gear, I had the best weapons, but there was one thing I lacked, and it was one of the most rare items in the game. And it was this staff. It was called Benediction. And it was not just epic, it was, wait for it, legendary. That's right. I know you're excited. I would be excited to get that too if I were you. And I'm not just kidding, like, this staff was extremely hard to get. There's probably about 3 people in the world of about 10 to 11 million players that had this staff at the time I was going for it. And that's one of the ways that games like this hook you in, right? They make stuff so rare, or there's always another level of difficulty. So if people want to get in and play even more and more and more, there's more content for them. And so I was spending weeks, if not months, of my life trying to get this staff. Because the way many video games work, especially free-to-play games, they've essentially worked in what are slot machines or gambling mechanics, right? So to get this staff, you have to beat the 9th dragon in the heart of a volcano. That's right, Black Rock Mountain, the molten core. Okay, there's only one person who heard of Blizzard. I'm sorry. I was completely a nerd. But to get that, you beat that 9th dragon, and you only have like a few percent chance that the staff drops, right? So it takes you hours and hours and hours to get to that dragon. You beat it, and guess what? I beat that dragon many times with all of my guild mates and the people that I got on and played with online. No staff, no staff, no staff. But tonight, I know you're excited for me. That's right. We beat the dragon, and the staff drops. I'm going to be one of the top World of Warcraft players in the whole world. But what? What? Are you kidding me? The second healer in my guild has more DKP than me. That's dragon killing points. It's the nerd currency for who gets the next item. I don't get my staff. Ah! What? And I freak out. And the sad part was, it doesn't even look that cool. That's the marketing image. The staff looks like that. It's so pixelated. It's so lame. But that's what I wanted. That was something that was going to give me status in the World of Warcraft. And I poured out so much of my time and my life trying to get that utterly meaningless, pixelated goal. And I never expected that to be where the path of my life would take me. I was not a kid who was prone to fits of anger or getting super upset, but something that I wanted so bad, and I didn't get it. And I'm so glad that I didn't. Because guess what? A few months later, Blizzard rolled out the next version of the game, and I would have had to start all over again. They would have all this new rare items. And I know people that are my age now, still, 15 years later, that are still playing the World of Warcraft and still in it. And so the very next day after that happened, I quit the World of Warcraft. And that's what it took for me, though, that painful event, to get out of it, to finally recognize, finally have my eyes open that this is a major problem for me. And so I continued on. I graduated. I met my wife. We got married. And video games continued to be a problem for me, but not in that level, right? Not with the red flags that said, hey, you have to do something about this. You have to quit. But my wife and I would be hanging out, and she would say something like, hey, you'd rather play video games tonight, huh? And the truth was, I did. But I'd make some excuse like, oh, I was stressed at work. Yeah, like, I just want to zone out for a little bit. But the truth was, video games were always going to be easier. It was always going to be easier for me to just go be entertained, to go look at something on my phone or to play games, than to invest in the difficult work of pursuing another relationship with an imperfect person. And as I went off to work, there was multiple nights where I pulled all-nighters because I just couldn't turn off the level. I was just going to play one more round and one more round. And I would make excuses like, oh, this isn't a big deal or it's not a problem. But it wasn't the problem like it was with World of Warcraft. I wouldn't say that I was addicted. I would say I was addicted to World of Warcraft, but I just had a bad habit now around gaming. And I needed to be more self-controlled with it. And it wasn't until I went up to a men's retreat at my church, and this was about 7 years ago, and it was after my daughter was born. And when my daughter was born, I found myself one day watching her. She's just on the floor, and I was sitting next to her, and she's doing tummy time, right? She's about 6 months old. She's not really doing much. So I'm playing a mobile game on my phone because I don't have time to sit behind a desktop anymore. But I'm instinctually hiding it behind my leg because I don't want her seeing me on my phone. Even at that young age, something instinctually was like, I don't want to be this model for her. But that's exactly what I was doing. I wasn't parenting, I was babysitting. I was literally sitting next to a baby doing what I wanted to do. And so as I thought about this, I was still gaming, but not seeing it as a problem. We actually have a picture there. That's me playing another game, and my wife thought this was funny, so she came in and snapped a photo. That little lump on my chest, there's a little tiny pacifier in there. That's my daughter, Aurora. And I was, she's just sleeping there, so why don't I play some video games? So I was continuing to play these games, and I went up to a men's retreat at church, and the pastor was talking about idolatry and priorities. And idols being something we might say, hey, God is the highest priority in my life, then family, then friends, then work. But when I looked at it, I was seeing, hey, video games are vying up there for my top priority. And what I mean by that is video games being an idol in my life is I was going to video games. And many of us, and I even without video games, we go to our screens and we go to other things to try to distract us from the difficulties of life. I was taking my burdens, my stress, I was taking them to video games, and then I was distracted for a little bit, but then an hour, 2 hours later, I just have to pick those back up. Instead of going to God, my Heavenly Father, who cares for me, who can take those burdens and help me work through them. I wasn't processing my emotions like King David models for us in the Psalms, where he takes his negative emotions and his positive emotions to God. And God cares for him. I was going to screens for that. I was going to video games. And so I made a decision at that men's retreat that I was going to just cold turkey quit everything. And I wasn't going to do it forever, but I made this kind of agreement with myself. I said, hey, you can go back to it if you still think it's a good idea in 6 months. So I quit everything. I told all the people in my mini church or my small group, and something interesting started happening. People started asking me, hey, can you talk to my sons? Can you talk to my nephew? Hey, can you talk to me? I'm 35. I'm trying to get my master's degree. I got 3 kids, and I can't stop playing this little game on my phone, or I can't stop scrolling and just watching YouTube when I get off work. And so I realized it wasn't just the next generation. All of us have been introduced to addictive technology through our devices, and it's only got more and more powerful, engaging, algorithmically tailored to us and our interests. And we all need to build self-control around how we approach technology so that we can teach the next generation, so that we can teach our kids. So that was how self-control got started. And our vision and mission is to help people redeem. And specifically, I'm trying to talk to families and students. So I'll go to schools, I'll go to other churches, and I want to help people redeem that time that we're spending on our devices for what God created us for the good works that He created us for looking outside of ourself, for controlling our self-interest and understanding that it's better to give than to receive, that when we serve other people, our head hits the pillow at night and we say, that was a good day. And at least for me, when I'm just focusing on myself and what I want out of the day, I get to the end of the pill, like head hits the pillow, I'm like, I just want more the next day. I want a little more me time. So what do we do about this? I want to point us to what can we actually do to build self-control. And I want to, as a kind of base level verse, focus on Ephesians 5:15-17. This was a letter written by the Apostle Paul to the Ephesian church. And he said, "Look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time, because the days are evil. And therefore do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is." This is a command to make the best use of the time, to make sure we're being wise about how we use our time. I was talking to a dad a few months ago, and he said, "Hey, my son's a good kid. He gets good grades. He does this, like, he does all his chores, and by 12, like noon on a Saturday, he's done. He's done everything I asked him to do." And I don't have an answer for him when he says, "Dad, why can't I play 7 hours of Fortnite?" Like, he's a good kid. And I struggled with it because like that's a great question. And I pointed him to this verse, saying, "Hey, I don't think the answer is just how many hours of screen time is too much. Hey, is this the right use of time? Can we make good use of this time?" And I'm not saying, and we at Self-Control, we don't teach, hey, no video games, no screen time ever. We want to teach us to use it as a tool. We can enjoy it with self-control, and there's a lot of people who enjoy the screen and the technology that we have without it becoming a major problem in their life. But at 7 hours, it's starting to say, hey, is this the best use of time? Can I be using this time more wisely? And also trying to understand what the will of the Lord is for our life, right? So if you believe in God and you believe that God made us, in Ephesians 2:10, it says that he created us in Christ Jesus for good works, that we should walk in them. And the intention there is that there really is a God who created this world, and the Bible teaches that he sent his son, Jesus Christ, to pay the price for us as sinners, that we all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, and that whoever believes in God should not perish but have everlasting life. And if we believe that, Pastor Zach talked about it earlier in his message, about that if we love God and we believe in him, we'll obey his commandments. And through the apostles' teaching and through his apostle Paul, he taught the Ephesian church through the apostle Paul to make the best use of the time. And so what I would recommend that we learn for ourselves and that we teach our children is to make the best use of the time, to think wisely about how we're spending our time, and to think about what God wants us to do with our time. And I want to just propose that one of the biggest impacts to my life, when I look back on my 20s and I look back to that kind of period of career, gaming, and what else? Well, there was family, but I wasn't investing in my relationships. And when I look back at my 20s, the level of male friendships like me, just other friends, was about this thin. And it was because I was doing kind of the things that were expected of me, right? I was doing, hey, I'm a good worker. I did my job. I got promoted. That means I was doing good, right? Or I showed up and I did that. I was making sure I was at least making my wife happy enough, right? And we've been married 10 years now. I think it's going well, but probably could be going better. But the thing that I consistently neglected was just reaching out to people outside of myself and my own immediate sphere. And that's what I see a lot of young people doing, and even how I was kind of taught, was you do school, you do the chores at home, like obey your parents, and then you're kind of good, right? So for that kid playing 7 hours of Fortnite, he was doing those things. And then the lesson was, after that, it's anything you want, or essentially entertainment as much as you want. And trying to teach that young man what is the will of the Lord for his life, and trying to teach him to look at others and see how he can be an influence and a light to his friends. So with that, I do just want to make sure we're all on the same page. This is an issue for this next generation. So I'm going to take a just real quick look at some stats This is US children and teens who spent 4 hours daily using devices before the pandemic and after. So essentially, the pandemic doubled our kids' screen time. And how much time? And this doesn't include Google Classroom, it doesn't include time for school or doing remote learning. This was just for entertainment. And so the stats is you start to get into the 14 and 17-year-old range there on the last column to the right. About 2/3 of teenagers are spending more than 4 hours daily on their phones. And this is one view of this. There's multiple studies where the average for a teenager is about 7 to 8 hours, which if they're sleeping 8 hours, that's a big if, but if they're sleeping 8 hours, they go to school roughly 8 hours. That's 8 more hours that they're essentially on their phones the entire time, or maybe some of the time while they're even in school. So this is essentially what 2/3 or more of our next generation is spending on. And the impacts of this are serious. So this is a graph from the CDC, and this looks at the percentage of youths with a major depressive episode, and effectively the numbers have almost tripled for girls and more than doubled for boys. So from about 5% to 11% for boys. And this is looking at into 2021. I think they just came out with 2022, and it's about flat with that. So it's not just the pandemic that's been affecting this. This has been on a dramatic upward trend since essentially the iPhone got really good and social media started coming out on this, and more games started coming out, and technology has been more accessible. So that amount of screen time is correlating to an effect on our children's mental health. So, welcome to Screen Time University. I want to give you 7 steps that you all can take towards self-control. You have your little work booklets there where you can follow along, take notes, and how I would encourage you to use this time. We're going to split the time up into essentially this first kind of 45 minutes or so we'll be teaching, and we'll go through these 7 steps, and then we'll take a quick break to grab some water or coffee or whatever you want, and then we'll come back in and we're going to actually do a workshop time where you can take some time to think. We're going to give you some question prompts, and you can actually start to craft a plan for your family around how you can put some of these things in place. So let's dive into the first of our 7 steps towards self-control. The first thing I want to make sure you understand is how dopamine impacts our brain and how habits are formed, because this is how we end up creating a system where we do want to habitually go back to our devices or our games for hours and hours and hours each day. So let's take a look at dopamine. One quick verse on this to give us some context on this from 1 Corinthians 6:12. The Apostle Paul to the Corinthian church says, "All things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be dominated by anything." It's my hope and prayer for all of you that none of you or your family members become dominated by a little rectangle in our pockets. So how does that happen? Dopamine is a neurotransmitter in our brain. It helps form habits. It's known as this feel-good hormone. So when you do something that you enjoy, dopamine is what's saying, "Hey, that was fun, let's do it again." So it's neither good nor bad. It doesn't care about your long-term goals, your mental health, or your well-being. It doesn't care that your kid might want to do well in school. It doesn't care that your kid might want these things long-term. It's just going to reward in the moment. Was that enjoyable for me in the moment? So there's tons of positive uses of dopamine. It's a way God created our brains, and it's firing all the time in totally normal and healthy circumstances. So when you receive a compliment or have a positive social interaction or someone tells a funny joke, dopamine is firing in your brain. You're like, I like hanging out with people that are funny or compliment me. I'm going to pursue situations like that again, or I'm going to continue to dress in a way that gets me compliments. So games create dopamine through winning. It's fun to win, and it's fun to win a game of basketball or like a board game or something in person, and it's fun to win online. And you can continually be matched with people that are right at your skill level all night long or all day long, and you can continue to play games that are right at your ability to win. And there's a lot of studies that show that essentially game makers make games easier or harder if you're losing a lot. They will make it easier, or they'll give you that power up right when you need it so that you win again and keep playing their game. And then they will kind of change it on you, increase the difficulty to make sure you're staying engaged. So they're changing the difficulty of game, not just here's how the game designed, but they're trying to essentially keep you playing the game as long as possible. But they also give you free items. It doesn't cost them anything, right? And they'll give you this, again, it's kind of this slot machine gambling mechanic where it's like, hey, maybe you'll get a super rare item. And the only reason it's super rare is because they said it's super rare and they designed the game to essentially have those components. But I've talked to so many teens and they're like, I got this amazing item. I'm like, awesome. And it's just kind of a cosmetic item or a part of the game. And the big thing that bothers me about the free-to-play games, just real quick, free-to-play games essentially prey upon the people that have a problem. So 90% of the world plays a free-to-play game, doesn't have an issue, doesn't spend any money on it, and we're like, this is amazing, I get to play this game for free. But typically the more vulnerable population, a lot of times children who don't understand the value of money, try to grab mom and dad's credit card because they want to get that super shiny, cool object or outfit. And essentially, free-to-play games are, and one of the largest game companies in the world, Riot, got sued a few years ago, $550 million, because they were essentially preying on and putting tactics to trick kids into spending more money and not even realizing they spent money. So anyway, I hope I poisoned the well for you a little bit around free-to-play games. And when you're thinking about the games that your kids play, understand if that game has a positive impact on them, or if they say, oh, it's free. Understand, maybe dive into the game a little bit. Just type in the game, like, hey, reviews on this game before you let them play that free-to-play game, because it might be encouraging them to go and just constantly trying to trick them into spending money or make them spend as much time as possible playing the game. All right, I'm going to move on. Social media, TikTok, YouTube, these apps create dopamine through social interactions. If it's nice to get a compliment in person, it's really nice to get 80 compliments on one of our pictures online. And even if we apply that filter or maybe edit how our body looks and we realize, hey, when I do that, I get more likes, well, then we're going to do that because dopamine is rewarding us for essentially even putting out that kind of fake image. So with dopamine, we don't know something's enjoyable, though, until we essentially experience it. So let's just take a normal example of eating, like think of your most favorite fast food or just meal if you don't eat fast food. You didn't know it was delicious until you ate it, right? But then, whenever we think about eating it, our mouth starts to salivate. We start to think about it, and dopamine actually releases ahead of that meal to encourage us to go there, maybe spend the more money than we plan to, and go get that delicious food. So a normal, healthy dopamine peak curve actually looks like this. We're at a baseline level, and then we anticipate going and getting our favorite meal, and then we eat the meal, still a lot of dopamine, but we actually get more dopamine out of the anticipation. So this means that your children are more motivated maybe to go to screens or go to technology even more than they like playing it. And their brains, and maybe why you're fighting them so much on screen time or going to it, is because their brains are saying, this is something enjoyable, it's fun for me to do. And it's literally releasing feel-good chemicals when they think about maybe I'm going to get some screen time or maybe I'm going to get to watch a show or play my favorite game. It's releasing right then and motivating them towards that behavior. And it's going to push them to maybe argue with you a little bit or push them to kind of seek that behavior out. But in the food example, our bellies are full, we experience the meal, we can't eat forever, we come back down to a normal, healthy level of dopamine again. But what does technology allow us to do? Technology allows us to go from one fun game of perfectly matched competition to the next, or one more level of Candy Crush, or one more show on Netflix, or one more short little video on YouTube or TikTok. And we can essentially ride this dopamine curve for hours and hours and hours. And I want to draw your attention to essentially the lower part of that curve. We go into, and scientists, this is neuroscience from Stanford, essentially you crash, right? And kids crash. And if anyone's given their kid a little bit too long or one too many episodes of Paw Patrol or whatever it is, and then they turn into little monsters and they yell at you when you say it's time to get off and eat dinner. This is what's going on in their brain. They are literally overstimulated and they've had just all this feel-good fun, and their neurotransmitter in their brain actually gets overwhelmed and exhausted. And what can happen, and this doesn't happen over one time of binging a little too much TV or playing video games, but over time, if we train our brains or we train our kids' brains over and over and over again daily, we can start to have a lower baseline. And that baseline, basically, the brain is a muscle like any one of our other bodies. It can be tired. And when you overstimulate it with too much dopamine firing back, those neurotransmitters, the actual parts that transfer those back and forth, become overwhelmed. And they're just looking for the highest hit of dopamine they can get. And normal day-to-day activities are going to seem pretty lame, right? Playing games is our brain's gonna be looking for that hit of dopamine. It's not gonna be looking for, hey, do your chores, hey, take out the trash, hey, do your homework. So the brain, and this is where I've seen this, and I've talked to multiple educators, and they say, hey, we banned phones in our school, and in our middle school, and all the 12 to 13-year-olds are just walking around like zombies. And to that I say, give it a few weeks. Because the brain is literally going through a detox period. So if you are trying to reintroduce some habits to your kids and you're kind of experiencing this, it can get better, and it usually takes 2 to 3 weeks for the brain levels, like the literal chemical levels in our brain, to reset and get back to a healthy level. But there's talk to many, many parents who do that, and then they say, and then my kids started to come back. And then my kids started to act kind of more like I remember them. All right, so that's the first step towards dopamine. I'm going to skip this slide just to keep moving us through. And I want to encourage us to not conform to this world. I know everybody else is doing it. I know it's just like, well, that's just how kids are growing up. That's just the technology that we have. But that's what the rest of the world is doing, and we are called to be transformed by the renewal of our mind. Again, that we're looking for that will of God, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. So the next step, usually when I'm talking through this, I get a lot of head nods from parents, but I think it's not necessarily just for our kids, it's for us as well, right? And I'm guessing some of us have seen this behavior in our own life. So the second step, I can't do much if I just say, hey, this is what you should go do for your kids, but I don't talk about how we should lead by example. So this next step that we need to take is to remove the plank. And Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount talked about first taking the plank out of our own eye, and then we'll be able to see clearly to remove the speck that is in our brother's eye, or in this context, our children's eye. So we need to look at how we're using technology and be ready to maybe make some changes and to lead by example. So that's step 2. We'll do a little bit more on that in the workshop. The third step here, let's talk about creating an environment for success. So if we actually want to do this, this is where I want to give us some practical tips on what to do here. And this isn't go roll out everything, but we're going to rapid fire through some things and write down something if you think, hey, that's maybe something I want to implement in our family. So the concept of we don't control our child, but we do control the environment, right? And this is from a book called Revolutionary Parenting by George Barna. And it talks about encouraging parents to get involved in their children's friend group and to obliterate obstacles to their faith. So this book is totally focused on Christian parents who raised kids who are now following Jesus Christ. And it asked them, it interviewed the parents and it interviewed the kids and said, hey, how did you do that? And those two areas, they talked about getting involved in your children's friend groups. I talked to a lot of parents. I'll just give you one example of a dad. And he said, like, hey, I said, do you know what games he's playing? And he said, no, not really. I wish, if he just got a bike, I would I could talk. She knows the games. I love it. But
Use the video games to bring the gospel since he's in the community.
There we go. I love it. Be a light wherever he is. But my point here is, if you don't understand what your kids are doing online or what games they're playing, they're going to be influenced by those people that they're playing games with alongside, or understand the types of communities and just make sure you're involved in that. And then the other component here, obliterating obstacles to their faith. There's a mom we met about a year ago through the ministry, and she had a 7-year-old daughter, and she gave the daughter one of her old iPhones, and it was turned off. It didn't have data, and she just said, "Hey, you know what? Like this will be fun. It's not a big problem." And she's watching YouTube Kids. It's totally okay. And just over essentially 2 to 3 years, the daughter was just watching more and more videos on YouTube, and kind of started to have behavioral issues. And they were doing everything. Like, this is a Christian mom. She was involved. She was trying to pay attention. She was like, it's not like we did it and we're just hands off and then woke up 2 years later and there's a problem. No, they were there in it, trying to put limits in place. And essentially, they found out their daughter is sneaking the phone in at night and just binging, watching for like 2, 3 hours at 1 to 4 in the morning. And finally, she had had enough, because now the daughter is talking about having some serious mental health issues, and they were going to counseling. And I think the mom made a very wise move here. And she walked out. She didn't even talk to her husband about that. Maybe not. That wasn't the wise part. But she walked out to the garage. She grabbed a sledgehammer and she marched back inside and she took it. No, she didn't smash the phone. You know what she did? She handed it to her now 10-year-old daughter. And she said, "Don't you see what it's doing? Don't you see how it's impacting your behavior? Do you want to continue with this in your life?" And she had her daughter obliterate the obstacle to her faith and to her life. And then she said it was really tough for a few weeks, but then she started to come back. And now she's not a perfect angel, but she's engaging again. She's laughing. We're talking around the dinner table. She's not just giving us one-word answers. And she came back. So I want to encourage you, if any of you are in a position where you have a child where you feel like, hey, I don't even know what to do, I just want to encourage you. I know that it's crazy and the world says, like, hey, yeah, like this is just the technology that we have. But don't be afraid to maybe hit the undo button and take something away and not even say, like, it's coming back in 2 weeks. Just take it completely away. Now, again, that was after like 2 or 3 years of them trying to put limits in place. But the lesson is, be willing to do that. Be willing to step in and understand that this thing could be addicting them, like we talked about with dopamine, and be ready to take the action necessary to care for your children. All right. Jesus gave us this example when he said in the Sermon on the Mount, if your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away, for it is better for you to lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into hell. He didn't say, hey, take a break for 2 weeks, you're grounded from your hand for a little while. No, he said, completely rip it out. Completely take it away. So, I want to talk through, there's another book called The Tech-Wise Family by Andy Crouch. It essentially gives 10 things that Andy did with his family and that a bunch of people in his life said, hey, you had some good ideas in there. You should write a book and put that down. So I'm not going to share all of them with you, but I'm just going to take a couple of my highlights. One of his rules for his household was to create more than you consume. And he used that as rhetoric to essentially say, hey, we're not just going to sit here and watch what other people are doing with their lives all day. We're going to build our own skills, and that is a reason why we're not going to be on our screens all the time. We are going to do art. We are going to do music. We are going to get outside and explore. And that's just the principle and the why. Kids are always wanting to understand the why behind, why can't I be on screens? Why can't I do this? That is a great why. One of our rules is we're going to create more than we consume. Go do something creative in your room. Go do something creative with your friends. Devices go to bed before we do, and they get up after we do. This is a great one, not just for kids, but for parents. Putting those devices to bed. We know that one of the biggest impacts of devices is a disruption to our sleep. And so being able to say, hey, this is bedtime, and then this is device bedtime. And that's just a rule of our household. And I would typically encourage that to be at least 30 minutes, if not 60 to 90 minutes before we go to bed. And if you're like, well, what are we going to do what are we going to do during that time? Maybe finish up homework, maybe read a book, maybe do some family time together. That can be a great rhythm for your household. And that's one of the ones that Andy did. No devices in the kids' rooms. This is one that I would just encourage you if you are having issues. This can be a rule that you put in place or something that you just start off with to avoid issues down the line. And then to do this, just have the devices charged in a common location in the kitchen. And again, this is healthy for adults too. My wife and I do this. We don't take our phones into our bed with us, and we don't just lay there. Like, it is not healthy. Even me many years removed from this, like I still have to put these rules in place to have self-control. All right, I got a couple more for us here. There's a book that came out recently called The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. He's not a Christian author, but there's some great ideas in here, and it aligned a lot with actually what I was already teaching. So I want to lay out some things just quickly by age category here. First one is for ages 5 and under. This is the recommendations from the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. So we're just going to take this as this is generally agreed, this is healthy amount of screen time use, and then I'm going to layer in a little bit of my advice on top of it. Until 24 months, limit screen time use to just video chatting with an adult. That is the recommendation. Essentially, no screens under 2. This becomes increasingly difficult when you have older kids, right? Because the older kids are watching something or doing something. And so be wise around what the rule is. But my recommendation would not be, hey, you're crying and hand them the iPhone. If you do that, they will learn to soothe with the device, and then they will build essentially just like a blanket or a pacifier. They will learn that soothes them. But guess what? In kindergarten, if you walk around with a blanket or pacifier, your friend's going to be like, you're lame, and they'll break that habit. They won't break the habit around the phone. They will continue with that habit to soothe their negative emotions, to soothe that behavior, and they'll continue to kind of develop that habit into their life. For 2 to 5, the recommendation, again, this is tough, but limit non-educational screen time to about 1 hour per weekday and 3 hours on the weekdays. I have an edit on here. My strong recommendation off of working with a lot of parents over multiple years here is that I would say if you're going to have screen time, have it be 1 to 2, maybe 3 days a week. And so it's not, hey, every day you get an hour of screen time. Every day you get this. And the reason I say that is that you can encourage them to be bored the other days. They need to build habits and other ways to spend their time. And it's not just, hey, every day I know I'm going to get some time with the screens, and then I'm going to be thinking about the screens and what I'm going to watch or what I'm going to play tomorrow when I know I get more time. It forces them to essentially build other habits around that. So that would be my recommendation on that. Turn off all screens during family meals and outings. I talk to a lot of parents who want this to be the norm in their life when their kids are older. I just want to encourage you, even when your children are 2 to 5 or even younger than that, don't bring your phone to the dinner table and start modeling that, because at what point do you essentially turn it off and say, okay, now mom and dad's not going to bring their phone to the table, and I don't want you, now that you have your own device, teenager, to bring your phone. Just make family time intentional even now with young kids. And we already talked about this piece and that as well. All right, so let's talk about ages 6 to 12. So these are just, again, some recommendations from Jonathan Haidt, so I'm going to go through them quickly. The concept that after school is for imaginative free play. Kids go to school in a very structured learning environment all day. Give them some time to just be imaginative and, again, creating more than they consume. And if we just go to devices, we're not being imaginative. And sure, there's maybe some exceptions, or you maybe say, hey, well, this video game is actually, they're building something in Minecraft. But yes, but 5 hours of that is kind of give them different environments to be able to do that in. They talk about pursuing safe, screen-free social scenarios, getting them engaged with other people and friends. Focus on maximizing in-person activity and sleep versus limiting the total screen time hours. Again, one of the most common rules that I hear is we only let our kids use screens this much time per day or on weekends. I think the focus on the rules should be more focused around this is when bedtime is, and these are the other things we're doing, and these are the days maybe that you can have some screen time, but not focusing on just here's the limits, here's what we're going to do instead, or here's the limit on bedtime. Like those are going to be the most impactful when it comes to affecting your children's well-being. Digital Sabbath is a part of your family routine. So a built-in day of rest, and specifically rest that doesn't include technology. And that's a great, I talk to so many people that do this and they're like, it's amazing. We tried it for a month. And then they went back to their devices. But start off, maybe it's like, hey, just after church on a Sunday, like from 12 to 8 or something like that, like do a half day, just try something out like that. Maybe work your way up to a full day. But the families that have implemented this and put this in place pays dividends. My wife and I have done this, and then we're connecting way more, and we're connecting way more It's bringing the whole family in together. No screens during weeknights. Some people have put this rule in place. It's like hard and fast, and it just makes it very simple for the kids. I'm not saying everyone has to do this, but this could be a recommendation that you could put on in your place. And then one of the recommendations that they make is delaying social media until 16, well after puberty. And this is a huge debate right now is like, hey, well, my kid's going to miss out. They're going to be ostracized. They're not going to be in the social circles, etc. But going back to that chart on the impact of major depressive episodes, social media has been very much proven, especially for girls, that it has a huge impact on their well-being. So you're actually helping them out and giving them a healthier childhood by saying, hey, we're going to limit this, and we're going to limit it. The U.S. Surgeon General, remember how we have on all of our cigarette packages? The U.S. Surgeon General said, hey, this is dangerous. The U.S. Surgeon General just last month said, government, I think we should mandate that all social media sites be given a warning when you sign up that this could be dangerous to your health, especially if you're a young child. So we're at that level where even the U.S. government is saying that this is a problem. So the other step, last step, during this age group, 6 to 12, is where I would recommend you look for addictive behavior. So let's talk about what addictive behavior actually looks like, because I have a lot of parents who say, hey, I think my kid's addicted to video games. I think they're addicted to their screens. I want to be very clear what addiction looks like. So if it's interfering with school, friendship, extracurriculars, or work, and what I mean is like they're missing shifts, they're missing papers, like this is starting to be, hey, this is a problem. I was starting to miss class because of World of Warcraft, and I was not a kid who missed class. It would become a problem in my life. And that's kind of some of the early stages of this is becoming a problem. They're lying about it to spend time online or gaming. They're sneaking it in, even though you set the rules on and they want it so bad. They're stealing money to pay for games or items. They're not telling you that they used your credit card to go do that. They would rather choose social media or gaming over in-person activities versus in-person type activities that they would typically enjoy. It's negatively impacting their sleep each night, or they keep using social media or game even after directly telling you, yes, mom and dad, I want to stop. This isn't good for me, but they're still doing it. So if that's the case, the recommendation to course correct on that is to completely remove it. Completely remove it, and that dopamine withdrawal will, again, take a week or two, but replacing it with other activities. And that's the recommendation. If you took them to therapy or you took them to something like that, that's what a marriage and family therapist, and I reviewed all this content with therapists, and like this is the recommendation when a child is in this state. Yes, you have a question?
Well, I mean, if they're going to be addicted to some, would it be better to be addicted to video games and drugs or alcohol?
That's a good question. So the question was, if they're going to be addicted to something, wouldn't it be better to be addicted to video games than drugs or alcohol? And I would say yes, if that's just my only option on answering the question. But I believe, just like in our Ephesians 5 passage, God calls us to look carefully then how we walk, not as unwise and as wise. That I don't think we should be addicted to anything. And that the things that we get addicted to, we go to those to help essentially cope with the difficulty of life. Stress, anxiety, boredom. Those are some of the strongest reasons that we go to video games, we go to social media. And typically what we do there, we're going to those to help essentially medicate those emotions. But it's just like taking an ibuprofen or a Tylenol. We're just medicating it for a little bit of time. Then the next day, we still have the problems. Instead of taking those problems to the Lord, praying about it, casting our burdens on the Lord because he cares for us, and trying to work through those emotions with God. I would say that's what I would strongly push you towards doing that and saying, well, I'm not going to say, yes, this is a good emotion or a good addiction. My wife, pardon me, my wife said while we were dating, because I played video games, she said, well, at least I know he's not out at the bars. Right. Right. So that didn't make me feel good. I was like, well, I still have a problem. I guess this is still not viewed on her as a positive. And I just share that to say the skills that I think we need to teach our kids are healthy, godly coping mechanisms. So I'm going to jump ahead in my point here real quick. Go ahead.
I was just saying, usually with addictions, it gets ratcheted up, right? It doesn't just stay the same. Like you were saying, how you start at one level, then you were doing it 12, 14 hours a day.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah. When it really gets to the point of addiction, it's wrecking our life, right? And I think, yeah. So let's talk about this one. This directly speaks to this. Let's talk about habits, right? This could be habits around food, exercise, or technology in this case. So you're neutral on technology and then you start using it. And hey, maybe I have some good habits around technology. I watch one episode of my show on Netflix and like I enjoy it and then I move back along with my day or I go get some rest. Then we move into the bad habit spectrum. I'm binging and I'm staying up till 4 a.m. and I'm not functioning very well the next day. And we can have good habits or bad habits whenever it comes to technology. And on the good habit spectrum, maybe we think of Navy SEALs as that thought of perfection. They're extremely well disciplined. So on habits, our bad habits, when done, when we do something habitually to our detriment, that's where you get into the addiction stage. Essentially, a bad habit done to the point where you're like, I don't care that I'm losing relationships. I don't care that I might get fired from my job. I just want to keep doing this. So, technology does have the propensity to get us to the level of addiction. And when I say addiction, I mean just like alcohol or drugs. I know people, and I'm mentoring a young man right now who is 20 and he quit his job at Chick-fil-A. He quit college. All he wants to do is play video games. He's just staying at home with his parents and he's not doing anything and he has no ambition to change that. And obviously, his parents are like, this can't work forever. You need to get back in school. You need to pursue a job. So he's in the category of addiction, and it's just as detrimental as other substances, right? It's just, it can have that negative impact. So when we think about it, and if you talk to Celebrate Recovery or Alcoholics Anonymous groups, there's a saying in that space that the opposite of addiction, how do you get out of addiction? Well, the opposite of addiction isn't Navy SEALs. Up there on the left, it's connection. It's connection to other people. And there's a huge reason why Weight Watchers or diet groups or CrossFit and exercise groups of people are incredibly powerful because the power of working with other people and other people encouraging us on, like in a Christian context, encouraging us on towards love and good deeds has so much power. And it's why God calls us in his word to not forsake meeting as is the habit of some, but continue to engage in fellowship, even though you're engaging with people that maybe rub you the wrong way sometimes or frustrate us, but still encouraging us and finding those people that will build us up. But even like I just said, people can let us down, right? And so I would say the perfect side of that spectrum isn't connection with other people. It's looking to Jesus Christ. It's looking to the example that God gave us in his son and looking at how can we live our lives more like Jesus Christ, always looking to others and loving others before ourselves, always looking at how we can not be interested in our own interests, but in those of others. And that's what I would encourage your son towards, right? Following Jesus as that example and not going into, hey, how can I serve myself and how can I use this even though I'm not in an addiction space. But I would say most of us probably, even as adults, probably have some bad habits, maybe on that right hand of the spectrum, right? And they can keep sneaking in. Like I quit video games, but then I went to social media. And then I started quitting all social media. And then I just scrolled the news for like 2 hours. And I was like, I just keep going to this. I just need something to be distracted by. And so I got in a habit of continuing to evaluate how I use technology and making sure I'm using it in a wise way and making sure, and again, entertainment or things that are enjoyable are nice. They're great stress relief tools in a healthy context, but we can quickly let them get out of that healthy balance. So I would put like playing one game with our friends of a video game we enjoy in the good habits category, and we can get off when we need to, and we can do our homework or we can do the other things that we've made commitments to around. But not going to bed because we just can't turn it off or just the Netflix autoplay goes and we're like, whatever, I'll watch another one. Like that might be in the bad habits spectrum. You kind of evaluate that for yourself. All right, I'm going to keep moving through so we can get to the workshop portion, but very good questions. Thank you for asking those. So the last thing, ages 13 to 18. Some of the suggestions here, and this is a big one, no smartphone until high school or even 16. The prefrontal cortex in our brain that actually makes logical decisions and not just kind of gut feel or emotional decisions doesn't continue developing until the age of 25. So this is why parents are great. Parents have a fully developed prefrontal cortex. We can fully logically understand that, hey, the decision for more video games or social media tonight, I just want it, instead of getting rest or getting sleep, we can make a logical, good decision there. And our children can sometimes, but sometimes we'll just want to go more with their emotions or their feelings driving the train there. So consider a technology contract when you're giving your child a phone or device and saying essentially, hey, if we're going to give this to you and you're going to use it, here's the expectation, and we want you to take ownership of this in terms of how you're going to use it. There's a lot of great examples online, but I would recommend you maybe take one of those and then edit it specifically to your child and you know how they would use it. It's a great tool, and we do this with our own kids. Responsibility in the home, giving them less free time, essentially, challenging them to take more ownership of the chores or what you're doing to just help run your household. And with 13, 18-year-olds, encourage them towards part-time jobs. I have a lot of parents who say, hey, I just want my kid to be able to focus on school. Your kid should probably be able to focus on school, or like even going into, even in high school and into college, and be able to just use a lot of free hours, right? They don't need all that free time to some responsibility. That's the point. Encourage them towards leadership or mentorship roles where they have to be an example. Get them serving in church or serving with the younger kids where they have to say, hey, somebody's actually looking at me on how I'm kind of using my time. I've talked to a lot of young people who then serve in youth, and they say, hey, a big thing that helped me be more responsible about how much Fortnite I'm playing is when I see how much the other kids, younger kids, are playing, and I can see that it's a problem for them, and then they start to see it in their own, for themselves, their own life. All right, and then an example there that they could make them pay for their own phone. It's a natural limiter. Some people do that. It's like, hey, if you want that, you're going to have to work for it. And that typically means it's going to be 15 or 16 because they got to get a job or they got to save for it, and then they got to pay the monthly bill. Have them participate in that monthly bill. It's a huge, amazing responsibility to get to use that. All right, let's keep working through this. Visibility is needed is step number 4 here. If you provide the tools, also provide the training and accountability. If you are connecting them to the internet, I just want to encourage you, you should be giving them some training around that. We wouldn't give our kids keys to a car without saying this is a dangerous tool. The internet is a dangerous tool. The iPhone and the Android, a tablet, iPad, whatever it is, PlayStation, Xbox that are internet connected, they're dangerous tools. They're connecting them without parental controls to anyone on the internet, right? And they are being influenced by anyone in those circumstances. So I just want to encourage you this. I would say that this would be a non-negotiable of getting involved and making sure you understand that you're training your kid on how to use this. You're at least giving them just kind of like we might have a talk around critical pieces of our kids growing up in puberty, etc. Talking about how they're going to use this should be one of those conversations that they have. Not just bad pictures, but screen time habits. So this is a lot of times people ask me questions about what to do around seeing pictures that they shouldn't online. We're not just monitoring so that we can make sure that they don't do that. We're monitoring so that we don't see them kind of exhibiting behavior that's in that kind of addictive state or just using screens way too much. And are they interrupting sleep? Trying to understand when they're using it. You can understand when the devices in your home are connecting to the internet or being turned on with the right router or parental controls, etc. And so if you need help on that, you can reach out to us at selfctrl.com. We offer free parent tech checks. It's one of the main things you can do on our homepage. Essentially book time with me or one of our other essentially volunteers who are IT focused nerds who can help you navigate through that. And we'll book some time if you have questions and say, hey, how do I set this up? It's this, selfctrl.com. And we'll have a link to it at the end of the presentation as well. There should be somewhere in here. You can just put, it's on the last page as well, .com after self-control. All right. Just a couple more here. Be ready for crucial conversations. This is essentially the main goal of what I want to equip you for, is to have the conversations around this topic with your kids. To have the, hey, when your kid asks you, why can't I have more screen time, or why can't I have a phone, why can't I do this, or can I have this, can my friends got this, can I use this, can I play this game, whatever it is, you're equipped to do the research, understand what you maybe need to do research around, and be able to have that conversation. I can't give you the guide for every sort of one of these conversations to happen. We're adding more and more to the website around how to have these in some of our blog posts. And we can give you some kind of conversation scripts over here's some things that you would want to talk about. But this is parenting. It's saying, hey, when our kids break the rules, when our kids are asking about these, what guidance do we give them when it comes to technology? So be ready for these crucial conversations. Be ready for the failure and the success. Be ready how to teach our kids how to handle technology as a concept so that when they're 18, they know that some things are dangerous and they need to be self-controlled. They need to be careful around them. There's going to be more prompts that we can do after in the workshop after the break. I do just want to encourage you, for those of you who believe in Jesus Christ, the Bible is an incredible tool for having conversations around this. All scripture is breathed out by God and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, and for training in righteousness, that the man of God may be complete and equipped for every good work. This applies to the technology that we use as well. All right. The last one, or second one here, we want to develop godly character, not just skills and information. The fruit of the Spirit here in Galatians, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such thing there is no law. This is what most parents I talk to, they want their children to exhibit these traits. And I just want to give you an example of what this conversation might look like in terms of how we steered our kids when they turn 18. She aced all her AP exams and she got into Harvard. I couldn't be more proud of her. Or, she truly loves the Lord, and I can see the fruit in her life in how she treats me and her friends and her siblings. I'm so proud of her. We want to raise children that are kind, that are good, that are faithful, gentle, self-controlled, have joy, have peace, have patience, not just have good grades, did well in sports. And that is what we're going to be pushed to, because that's what the world is going to celebrate. And all of us can fall into this trap, but I want to just encourage us. This is the reason why we have conversations around technology, so that our kids have this. Not just so that they get good grades and don't fall behind in school, not just so they don't not get enough sleep, but it's so that they exhibit these traits. And the last step here, be ready. I'm going to skip through this one. Expect resistance. There's a verse in the Bible that talks about the devil being a prowling lion looking for someone to devour. So I want to take us back to Blizzard for a second. This was the game company that I wanted a job at for so many years. Well, 6 months after I quit video games, I got a call from a buddy of mine. His name was Mike. And Mike said, "Hey, Ian, you got to come interview at my company. You got to work on my team. You would love working here." And I said, "Mike, you have no idea. I would love working there." And I went and I interviewed and I crushed it, because I just knew all the answers, because that interview was at Blizzard Entertainment. And I got my dream job offer. I would have been managing their game websites, their forums for all of their users to engage and talk about the games on, their sites for their big conference, BlizzCon. I'd be managing the development teams that worked on those sites. Literally, my idol offered me a job to say, "Hey, come work here," right after I quit. So I want to just encourage you, if I had taken that job, and even my wife was like, "Congrats, I'm so proud of you. You got to take it." All my friends were encouraging me, congratulating me, but I just quit video games. And I was trying to encourage and already mentoring some young men at that point that, hey, there's a better way to live life. And I'm going to go promote video games to literally billions of people. There's 3 billion gamers worldwide. I was so tempted to take that, but I'm so glad that I didn't, because God changed my life. And I'd rather be here with you all in this room teaching you that following Jesus Christ and that having self-control around the technology that we use is so much better than one more game or one more round of our favorite thing or one more episode of our favorite thing. Understanding that it's dangerous, understanding that we want to teach our kids how to be self-controlled is so much better. And so I turned down Blizzard, and I'm here teaching you through Screen Time University. I want to take a break now. Go ahead and grab some water, use the restroom, grab some coffee, and we'll come back in about 5 to 7 minutes and go through some workshop items here, and I'll give you some questions to think about. Q&A. So we'll try to do about 20 minutes of our workshop time here, and then we'll jump into some Q&A. So the first one here, about halfway through, we talked about these 7 steps, and I'm just going to take us through some of these. The first one on your step here, it talks about, I don't have a slide for it, but essentially crucial conversations. And I want to give just a few of these that you can look up. There's going to be some verses here if you want to do a Bible study on, hey, why wouldn't we have excessive screen time or gaming? Like, how could you go through from a biblical context and have that conversation with your kids? There's some there. And then a few verses there that you can look up around social media and having a conversation with your child around how to use social media wisely, or maybe why we would be careful with that as well. So I just wanted to give those as examples for you there on page 9. On page 10, this is potentially the most valuable part of the workshop. Let's talk about that step 2, removing the plank. So number 2 there, remove the plank. And I just want to give you a verse as context here. In Hebrews 12:1 and 2, it says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses," or maybe I could translate little witnesses in our homes, children, "let us lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God." There are a lot of little eyes and nieces and nephews and a lot of people looking at us on how we use our time and how we use technology. And let's be real, we can put a lot of rules in place and a lot of things, but how we use our devices is probably going to be the single biggest impact on what's modeled for our kids and how they use it. So I want to just give you a second here on that first block. Take some time to think through, if you're here by yourself, or share with your spouse, how you can lead your children by example in your own tech use. Not your spouse's, just yours. Let's think through just you, not saying, hey, I think you could do this. Just take some time, a few minutes to do that and talk with each other. Here's the fun one. I don't know if you read ahead. If you are open to it and you're here with your spouse, I want you to ask them. I actually want you to say the words. I don't just start talking and start speaking into your spouse's life, but literally ask them, hey, do you see any tech-based weights or habits that I can lay aside to help run the race that is before us for our kids? If you're willing, go ahead and talk through that with your spouse now. All right. I have just some ideas on there. If you were struggling to come up with some thoughts on how to make a commitment, I would just encourage you, maybe if you wrote something down, don't use the words, hey, I want to do this less. I want to do this more. I should do this. I should try to do this. Use the words, I will. I'm going to do this. Here's the thing I'm going to do. Be more specific about what that looks like. And those are just some, through trial and error, some things when I set goals for myself. You can set it in a way that you don't actually have to keep it, right? Or you negotiate. I think I met it. I did a little less time on Instagram, right? Now, think about how you can do that. All right. I'm going to talk through just 3. We're going to a couple prompts here, and this is probably the last component that we'll talk through, is crafting your environment. I want to give you time to think about, and I'm just going to put some prompts up on the screen. You can read these, but essentially, hey, how can I get more visibility into the usage of tech in my home? And maybe one of these is I need to book a time with a parent tech check. I need to do that because I don't know. I'm not comfortable. I don't feel equipped to look into this myself. But making sure you have visibility into how much screen time is being used and what content is being used. So there's some ideas on there of things that you can think about. But take some time, take a few minutes to think through that. Talk with your spouse. Hey, we need to make sure we get this in place. We need to make sure we get that in place. So take some time to do that now. Just a quick note on those devices. Number 3, designed for parents, Bark and Gab are kid-based phones. They're great first phones. My kids will probably get one of those, or they'll get like a Gab watch. They have like the smart watch. A lot of the reasons I hear, besides kids begging for it for years, to get their kid their first phone is, well, the parents say, I want to keep track of them, right? I want to stay in touch with them. These are tools that they have basically a phone. It looks like a phone, and you have incredibly high visibility into how they're using it, and it doesn't have all of the iPhone store or the App Store. It doesn't have all of the Android store. So there's a lot of the kind of more dangerous apps that just you can't even use them. So I would strongly recommend those as first ones.
My friend that recommended that last weekend said that he thinks a lot of people in Japan they want to get away from this. They're going back to just regular
Flip phones, yeah.
where you can just call people and text.
It's a phone, not a mini computer.
If your child's old enough, 16, 15, or whatever, I know they have the wrists, the watches, but if you want to get them an actual phone to do it without having internet on it,
Yeah.
just get them a flip phone. What do you think of that?
No, absolutely. That's what I'm essentially recommending here is like, especially in middle school, if you want to have access to them or want to have communication with them, Bark phone or a Gab phone is not a like, hey, this is going to wreck your life phone, right? The biggest thing that I hear with parents on theirs is group texts, right? Because their kids are on group texts, and then but that's just middle school. That's not like.
You still need to look at it.
I would recommend you still engage because that's how your kids are interacting with their friends, but in the same way that you would want to be paying attention to how they're interacting with their friends, how they're acting.
And the privacy thing is really not. You just can't give your kids that kind of privacy in these times.
So
I did, and then I learned the hard way.
sure. Yeah, my recommendation on that, and this is obviously up to each and every one, every parent, but my recommendation is going back to the point I made earlier. If you're giving them the tools, help them through it with accountability and help them through it with training and making sure up front they know that there's a complete expectation that you can essentially monitor the device or look through it. If you give them a Gab Bark phone, it would be like, hey, this is just, I get full view of everything that goes on here. And you do get full view of like the. Yes, you can view it from your parent app. You can essentially see everything that's going on. You can see where the GPS, where the phone's been, etc. And that's just like that's what the device is. So you don't even have to explain, well, I'm going to be going into your phone or coming into your room and taking it from you or anything like that. It's a much easier barrier to entry as you essentially it would be what I would recommend is the playbook if you're going to introduce that to your kids because they do get to kind of work through pieces of it at a time. They do get that always connected. They work through that, their connections with their friends, etc. They feel like they're connected and they're part of the group and the social dynamics, but they're not on social media through their phone. They're not on other things, on games, etc. So, well, absolutely. All right. Sounds like if you have more thoughts on that, we can ask more questions on that. I do want to push us to this next one and take some time to think through this next category there on page 11. How can I be prioritizing sleep? And again, this is one of the biggest things that screens affect, and our kids don't think it's an issue, right? And we probably didn't think it was an issue, but sleep is incredibly important. We know that it's a huge part of their developing brain, especially in the younger ages, like under 10. It's just their brain needs that time to continue to develop. And then into the teenage years, like our kids think they know it all and they think that they can go with 5 hours of sleep and it doesn't impact them that they're staying up late every night. Like it impacts them, right? I had major stomach issues for most of my life going into my 20s. When I quit video games and I stopped staying up late, my stomach issues just went away. And I was like, what was this? That was the first time I actually got healthy sleep consistently in my entire life. So I just want us to all remember sleep is super important. So how can we be prioritizing sleep? Let's think about, here's some things to think about. If you break through the excuses, right? Don't put the screen in your kid's room. If you need to buy alarm clocks for the whole family, they're like $6 on Amazon. Like just make that purchase, right? Old school analog alarm clocks so that the device doesn't have to be, well, I have to keep this. I use it for my alarm or whatever it is. And then think through what are some pre-bedtime activities? What's that buffer limit on time limits for games, right? So if the time limit for getting off screens is 9 p.m., If your kid starts a game at 8:55, they're going to say, well, I can't, I got to finish the round, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to like let the people down. Have in your mind already, like with that, all right, they can go over 5 minutes or whatever it is, and then the screen's getting turned off or whatever. Or you have the conversation like, hey, you got to turn it off. I don't care what it does to the other people there. You made a commitment to be done by 9. Like, have that script, have that conversation in your mind before it happens, and start working with your kids through that and view that as one of those crucial conversation opportunities. Like, it's being softballed up to you every time your kid is going to break the rule or negotiate the rule. That's when you can reinforce this in their life. So take some time, think through prioritizing sleep. I'm going to talk through just 3. We're going to a couple prompts here, and this is probably the last component that we'll talk through, is crafting your environment. I want to give you time to think about, and I'm just going to put some prompts up on the screen. You can read these, but essentially, hey, how can I get more visibility into the usage of tech in my home? And maybe one of these is I need to book a time with a parent tech check. I need to do that because I don't know. I'm not comfortable. I don't feel equipped to look into this myself. But making sure you have visibility into how much screen time is being used and what content is being used. So there's some ideas on there of things that you can think about. But take some time, take a few minutes to think through that. Talk with your spouse. Hey, we need to make sure we get this in place. We need to make sure we get that in place. So take some time to do that now. All right, I'm going to do one more prompt for us, and then the last page is there. I'm going to let you kind of take home. The last pages there on expect resistance 12 and 13 are essentially narrowing down, taking time to say like, hey, we talked about a lot. You maybe talked and had, hey, we should do this, we should do that, but what are we actually going to do? And then I left you a little calendar there on the last page. When are you going to do it? So I don't have the dates filled in there, but just consider today is Sunday. Am I doing it this week? Or we're going to talk about this in a week. We're going to talk about it in end of the month, kind of before they go back to school, resetting. When are we having these conversations? And just write down there what that looks like. So that'll be take home. So the last thing that I just want to give you a few minutes to think through, and I'm just going to speak to this and write down some stuff while I'm talking to it, but then I want to open it up for questions to make sure I get a chance to engage with you. That last one on page 11, encouraging boredom. So if we're crafting an environment where it's not so focused on technology and they are using technology in a healthy way, one of the biggest things they're going to tell you is, well, I'm bored, right? We use this because we're bored. We engage, well, I can go play with my friends on here anytime. It's like, well, sometimes you're not playing with your friends and you just continue to play Fortnite after your friends hop off, or Roblox, or whatever it is. So thinking through how can we encourage boredom? One of the main ways is just reducing screen access. Like, those are the hard and fast rules. The screens are not available at these times. Explaining the why behind that. Explaining essentially some of the things that we talked through. Knowing that if we just use our screens all the time, we're going to go to screens for like dealing with our emotions or dealing with those things. And we do need to learn how to do other aspects of life and other ways to engage with other people in that social context, but also just in our own way. So encouraging boredom is something that I definitely like. We say this to our kids all the time. They say, can we watch a show or can we watch a screen? I don't know why my 5-year-old asks for it all the time, because we just say no like 50 times a week. We do what we usually do in our home is like Friday night movie night. And so we'll watch it together and we'll engage together. And he still asks for a movie like Saturday through Thursday. And we're like, nobody. But he enjoys it. And that gives me an idea of like, man, that's how engaging it is for him. But he still, the dopamine spikes like crazy when he watches that Mario movie. And we're like, yeah, I know, it's super funny. But anyway, so trying to kind of make that the rule and the expectation. So thinking through some of that, family game nights, encouraging outdoor adventures, encouraging leadership, starting something new, encouraging part-time jobs. But where I was going with that 5-year-old story was just, we tell our 5-year-old, go in your room and be bored. Like, I literally say that to him. And he's like, oh, okay. But then like 3 minutes later, He's rescuing somebody with the fire truck and doing the thing and building something with Duplos and Legos. Like, he will do it. He will go be creative or do those things. But he will also ask for the movie every time, and he will love it if I give it to him. But knowing that I want him to be bored in those other times. So take some time to think through that. But I'm going to open it up at this point to questions and answers. We got about 10, 15 minutes. If you need to get going, feel free, but we would love to continue engaging with you. So any questions about what I covered today, or maybe your specific scenario?